I moved to Australia many years ago from India. Can I have a show of hands? Who here is born overseas? A couple of us, great. So I remember on the plane when I was coming from India, I was thinking, this is going to be really different. You might know a lot of Indian people don't eat beef. And here I was, moving to the barbecue capital of the world. The plane lands at Tullamarine Airport. I grab my luggage and I step out. And I see this dusty white ute. And across the back, there's this bumper sticker. And the bumper sticker says, "This is cattle country. Eat beef, you bastards." That was my introduction to Australia. When I moved to Melbourne people love talking about the weather. Now, is this a thing in Sydney? Do your parents and your teachers love talking about the weather? And when I came from India, I had zero weather conversation. Because what would that look like? Oh, so hot today. Yesterday too, so hot. But today I can do weather talk. I love Melbourne. Australia's home. This is my family, all Australian born, 100% made in Melbourne. Future leaders? I don't know, but I hope so. But what I do know is that the future of leadership is right here in the room. And it's students like you who are going to create the future tomorrow. So what are some tools that can help us on this journey? I remember when I was 10, my teacher, Miss Asha, came into the classroom and she asked us to think of a sentence. And she said, the sentence can only have 10 words. Each of those words can only have 2 letters and the sentence has got to make sense. We tried and came up with nothing. She then wrote up on the board, if it is to be, it is up to me. If it is to be, it is up to me. That day, Miss Asha influenced a classroom full of children to think differently about life. But not just in that moment or for that day, for the rest of our lives. That was my first brush with influence. So influence about getting people who turn up to turn on. And it's the key to your personal and professional success. Now, I believe so much in influence that 10 years ago, I co-founded a company that did just one thing. It specialized in the oldest form of influence, in storytelling. So here I am. I'm an economist by training. How many of you are studying economics in school? A couple of us. Do you know how many jokes there are about economists and lawyers? Loads? There's actually only 3, because the rest are true stories. So here I am. I'm an economist by training, and I co-found a company that does storytelling. And I was so excited. I raced home to tell my mom. I'm like, Mom, I'm going to be doing storytelling. And my mom replied, like any good Indian mother would, is that a job? Why can't you be an IT or be a doctor? Storytelling is as old as time, but in terms of influence, it's the contemporary tool of our time. Influence is so important that every year, Time magazine, they publish a special edition. And it's dedicated to the world's 100 most influential people. And recently they put Beyoncé on the cover of Time magazine. And the blurb on Beyoncé said, Beyoncé doesn't just sit at tables. Beyoncé builds better tables. And that's what mastering influence can do for you. It can help you build a better table, whatever that looks like for you. Connecting with your fellow students, engaging your school, inspiring your community. So I'm going to share with you 3 ideas around influence. So traditionally, influence has been about yell and tell, about command and control. How many of you have a part-time job or volunteer? So have you ever had a boss pull rank on you? Or do your parents shout at you sometimes, clean up your room or else? You've experienced hard power. So hard power is yell and tell. So way back in the 14th century, Machiavelli wrote The Prince. And in The Prince, he said, it's better to be feared than to be loved. But that's not what we want for us as modern students, as professionals. What do you think the limitations of trying to influence using yell and tell, using hard power might be? Can you just have a chat to the person next to you? What are some of the limitations of using hard power to influence? Just have a chat to the person next to you. Thank you. Can I have a show of hands? How many of you like being told what to do? Nobody. One. A couple of things happen when you try to influence with yell and tell, with hard power. You could get outright rebellion. You could get grudging compliance. You know, when people just do the bare minimum. Or you could get that other horrible thing that happens when people say yes, but they do nothing. And with influence, we're trying to get people who turn up to turn on. We're trying to get the best from people. So, in the 1990s, along with high-waisted ripped jeans, was that just me? A couple of us? The Spice Girls, remember them? And The Simpsons, we discovered soft power. So soft power comes to us from Harvard business professor Joseph Nye. He said soft power is about using connecting, consulting, collaborating to influence. And Geordie shared such wonderful examples of how they all collaborated with Jess Irvin to create that beautiful piece of music. In Hollywood terms, I think of hard power as Arnold Schwarzenegger. And soft power, like Marilyn Monroe, it's beautiful, it's slow, it's seductive. So hard power is very much about push, and soft power is very much about pull. Poor Arnie, turns out there's so little we know about him. Do you know he's an economist by training? I know. Did you know when he was governor of California, he didn't take a salary his entire tenure as governor? And this is perhaps the least known fact about him. He's a brilliant actor. We have all grossly underestimated him. He had a love child, and for 10 years he kept it a secret from his wife Maria. That takes brilliant acting, don't you reckon? So hard power is about coercion, and soft power is about persuasion. And sometimes in the work we do every day, at school, at home, with friends and family, when you are trying to influence, only soft power will do. To find out why, I want you to travel with me to Singapore. Who's been to Singapore? Fabulous. I love Singapore. Sparkly clean, sizzling hot, great food. But sadly, on October 30th, 2000, Singapore Airlines had a fatal air crash. 83 people died. It was a deeply sad time. A tiny country, their national carrier. A press conference was called, and the relatives and friends of the deceased were invited to attend. The press conference was also beamed live around Singapore, and everybody in Singapore stopped what they were doing to watch. At the press conference, Rick Clements, who was then Vice President of Public Affairs, he stood up behind a lectern. He offered his sincerest condolences to people in the room, and he said, "We at Singapore Airlines, we're going to look at every step, process, policy to prevent tragedies." Just then, a man in the audience who'd lost his brother stood up and started hurling abuse at Rick Clements. A security guard started to move towards this man to drag him away when Rick Clements, he stepped out from behind the lectern, he flagged the security guard away, and he started to move towards this by now silently sobbing man. The camera panned on Rick, and you could hear a pin drop in the auditorium because nobody knew what would happen next. Rick walked up to the man, he reached out, and he hugged him. That hug, that moment of soft power, moved people in the room, including hardened journalists, to tears. That hug, that moment of soft power, was when Rick Clements influenced not just people in the room, but an entire nation, that they could move forward together. Soft power. So every time you consult, you connect, you collaborate. Soft power, it can give you influence far beyond the edges of hard power. Now, some leaders just intuitively know this. Mother Teresa was a leader like that. I grew up in Bombay. Who's been to Bombay? Just me? A couple of us. Bombay is like this mega urban city. It's packed to the rafters. This is what the trains look like in Bombay. I'm assuming you never caught a train. But if you're ever at Churchgate Station and you're running late to get on the train, the most amazing thing will happen. All these hands will come out to give you a hand, to help you on the train. The power of touch, soft power, in one of the hardest places on earth. So when I was growing up in Bombay, we'd organized a massive anti-war protest all over the country. And Mother Teresa, who lived in Calcutta then, was invited to join this anti-war protest. And she replied, "Please invite me when you're marching for peace." Peace, a hug, love, all soft power. At school, connecting, consulting, collaborating, all soft power. You never want to live a day without soft power, but it's always about context, isn't it? So sometimes you might want to use hard power when stuff is urgent or it's an emergency or people have to follow process. But most of the time, you want to live, play, work in a world with soft power. You almost, in a sense, have to be like a Bollywood hero. Who here has seen a Bollywood film? Hooray! The rest of you, a lifetime of delight ahead of you. So Bollywood hero is many things, but he's master of context. So one minute you see him and he's using hard power and he's bashing up the bad guys. The next minute you see him, he's using soft power and he's romancing the woman he loves. He's dancing in the city square, romancing the woman he loves. And what's amazing, when he dances in the city square, everybody there, the retail trader, the passing students, the homeless guy, they all know the steps too. And they dance all together. Now, I tried this in Martin Place, didn't quite work. No one else knew the steps. So it's always about context. But soft power too, as an influence tool, when you're connecting, you're collaborating, you're consulting, soft power too as an influence tool has its limitations. Can you have a chat to the person next to you? What are some of the limitations of using soft power to influence? Just have a chat to the person next to you. Okay, a couple of things happen when you use soft power to influence. Soft power takes time. It takes meetings, meetings, and more meetings. How many of you would like more meetings around your project work in your week? Most of us would like more time in our day. Yeah. So soft power takes time. The other thing about soft power is it's incredibly subtle. So if hard power is a fist, soft power is a fingertip. So sometimes it doesn't land. And this is what happened to my friend, Shanika Fernando. He's the founder of a group of restaurants called Lentil as Anything. Great name. Have you been? There's one out in Newtown. So Lentil as Anything is based on soft power. It's based on the power of trust. So the menu doesn't have any prices. And at the end of the meal, you as the customer, you pay what you think the meal is worth. Amazing, huh? So Shanika is very different, as you can tell, from that business model. He just lives out at St. Kilda near Melbourne, in Melbourne. And he was seeking enlightenment. So based on what his Buddhist teacher said, he left home and he pitched a tent on St. Kilda foreshore, which is like Bondi Beach. And he started to live in the tent because he thought that's what his teacher said. To seek enlightenment, you have to live in a tent. And of course, he got hassled by the police, by the council. Like, you can't just live on a public beach. And after 3 weeks of living on the tent, He rang his Buddhist teacher in frustration and said, "You know what? This whole thing, seeking enlightenment by living in a tent, it's not working." And his Buddhist teacher replied, "Shanika, you silly man. I never said live in a tent. I said live with intent." Thank you. Every day in the work at school, every day it's about engaging people and delivering results. This could be results on your project, on your presentation, class results. So every day we've got to work with people, other students, our friends, our teachers, parents, and we've got to deliver results. But could the tools of influence that we have been using, so we've got hard power. But hard power hurts. It hurts us, it hurts other people, it hurts our chances of success. We've got soft power. But sometimes soft power can be slow. It can be subtle. It can be hard to do well. So is there something different we should all be trying? So I'm going to introduce you to one of my clients who did just that. He tried something different. His name is Michael Brand. He was responsible for 20 retail branches, and they had targets. And for 2 years, nobody was meeting their targets. Michael tried everything. He tried hard power. Hard power is also attaching a financial incentive. That didn't work. He tried soft power, and he had meeting after meeting after meeting. And through those meetings, he found out people said, "You know what? It's the one thing we hate doing. Every Monday when we rock up into work, we think, oh, not targets again." So Michael decided to try something different. The next time he went to visit some of his branches, this is what he shared with them. "When I was a child, I hated eating Brussels sprouts. Every time Brussels sprouts were served at dinner, I'd push my Brussels sprouts to one side of my plate, and I'd eat the rest of my dinner, knowing very well that at the end, my mother would make me eat cold Brussels sprouts because I couldn't leave the table unless I'd eaten my vegetables. One night, when Brussels sprouts were served yet again, I decided to eat my Brussels sprouts first. I then relaxed and enjoyed the rest of my meal." Do you think we could treat our targets like Brussels sprouts? None of us can leave the table unless we've eaten our Brussels sprouts. Do you think we could eat them early and fast in the week, and then we can all relax and enjoy the rest of our week? I saw Michael 2 weeks later, and he traveled to 11 branches narrating Brussels sprouts. And he said the most incredible thing had happened. For the first time in 2 years, everybody in those 11 branches was meeting or exceeding their targets. Not only that, no one was talking about targets anymore. They were talking about Brussels sprouts. They're going, "It's only 10 o'clock. I've eaten 3 already." What about you? Michael used Brussels sprouts for 6 months because every time he did, he was able to engage people and deliver results. That day, Michael quantum leaped his influence because he discovered a power that is as old as time, yet a power that's the contemporary tool of our time. He discovered story power. So story power is purposeful storytelling with a purpose and for results. But why do you need story power every day at school when you're working as future leaders? Because hard power informs, soft power invites, and story power inspires. So we live in a world bloated with information, and at the same time, there's an inspiration famine. So storytelling can help us convert that famine into a feast. I want you to now travel back with me in time, 25th of June, 1995. I was in front of my TV getting ready to watch South Africa play New Zealand in the Rugby World Cup. Who was watching the Rugby World Final a few weeks ago? Yeah. So this was way back in 95. This was South Africa, a fragile new democracy, taking on the strongest rugby team in the world. Nelson Mandela walks onto the pitch, and he was wearing a Springboks jersey, a symbol for all the white South Africans who jumped up to their feet, laughing, crying, clapping. He then raised his fist in an ANC salute, a symbol for all the black South Africans who jumped up to their feet, laughing, dancing, crying. And in that one move, Nelson Mandela united black and white South Africans. South Africa went on to win that match, 15-11. And I remember crying. And I don't even like rugby. Nelson Mandela's whole life has been a testimony to hard power. He was a prisoner for 27 years. To soft power, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And the light dimmed in our world with his passing on December 5th, a few years ago. But the story of his life will continue to inspire not just black and white South Africans, but all of humanity, that a brighter future is possible. Story power. It can change the world. Story power. Use it to change your world. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.